evening. Should we get started? I want to leave time for you guys to finish the written portion. Well, thank you for coming. My name is David John Marley. I teach in the history department and the honors department here at Cal State Fullerton. And born and raised here in Orange County, California. I got my master's degree here at Cal State Fullerton. And I had a professor that was here when they built the Arboretum. He said it was supposed to be a parking lot, like the extension of the parking lot. And he said the student body got upset and they thought there was too much concrete and they wanted land, and so they built this. And I told my class, one of my classes, I'm like, isn't that awesome? And they all said, we want a parking lot. And one girl in the back of the class was, stupid hippies. And I'm like, they weren't hippies probably, but it's fantastic, right? And it's fun to walk through here. I like to do that. Walk from my office and cruise through here. But when I was 7 years old, my sister took me to Disneyland, and I remember waiting in line. I don't remember actually hardly anything about the day. I was only 7, she was 16, and she took me for the day, and I remember we were in line for the Jungle Cruise, and this is literally the only part I remember. Every day we stayed till the fireworks, and I remember none of it. So I just think of all the money I've wasted on doing stuff for my kids. But at the end of it, we're in line for the Jungle Cruise, and we're going to be on the next boat, and the boat leaves, and the guy at the dock, so where are you guys from? I said, Orange. It's like, Orange, California? I'm like, yeah. Why are you here? He said, I don't know. My sister just said she was going to take me. And the guy looks at my sister up and down, and then he kneels down right in front of me and goes, be careful, she's going to ask you for something. And he like nodded and winked, and I'm like, okay. Like I thought he was like letting me in on a great secret of the universe. But it was at that moment I said, when I'm grown up, this is where I'm going to work. I'm going to work at Jungle Cruise. And I should have had higher goals, but I made it my goal. And I worked there briefly in the summer of '96. I worked there for like 8 months because I was moving back east to go to grad school, and I didn't know if I was ever going to come back. So I worked there for just that summer, and then when I came back to California, I started working first in entertainment, and then I went back to Jungle Cruise, where I was there for 3.5 years. And it was awesome. I worked here as a part-time faculty member, and I would work at the park. So there were times I would drive over in my suit and tie and go put on shorts and jungle outfit and go be a skipper for a while. And there was one time I was teaching a class at Cerritos College, and it was a Friday night, Saturday morning class, and I had a Friday day shift at Jungle. And about halfway through my work day, I was on a boat when I realized I came to work in these clothes. And I'm not going to start a class off in shorts and an old dirty shirt. So I went to costuming, and I got the outfit that leads wear for parades. I just said, yeah, I'm being on parade leave today. They didn't check. So I got the tie and the whole outfit, and I went, oh, look, respectable. So it worked. I heard it would be a lot tougher to get away with that kind of stuff today. But anyway, I became obsessed with Jungle Cruise, and my wife calls it my mistress. And I guess for good reason, because it's taken over my life. When I left Disneyland, I started a stand-up comedy show where all the performers are current or former Jungle Cruise skippers. Have you been to a skipper show?
They all should be.
Right? Yeah. Well, I took a stand-up comedy class, and I kept doing stuff, and the teacher would go, wait, how do you know how to do that? I'm like, Jungle Cruise? Because in stand-up comedy, if you can get up on stage 3 times in a week, you're doing something good. And at Jungle Cruise, that's, in the first hour, you've done 4 or 5 at least, right? You've done too many, depending on how lazy your partner is, your co-partner. Let me scoot this back a little bit. And so I started doing that, so I still do it. Our next show is going to be at the Brea Improv on Sunday, April 3rd. It's the skipper show. All the performers are current or former Jungle Cruise skippers. Some of the jokes are really Disney, some aren't. So it's always fun to see who's going to show up and what jokes they're going to do. And I started, we have a little tiny backyard at our house in Costa Mesa, and I made, I said, all right, I'm going to put jungle plants in here, make it jungly. My girls wanted a fort, so they said, we want a princess castle. I said, on the inside it can be whatever you want. On the outside it's going to look like the Jungle Cruise. And so I made it look like the boathouse, and then the insides can be pink and flowery, whatever they want. And then, so I covered all around there. And I brought some show and tell books, but I brought our show and tell. This is an actual plant from the Jungle Cruise. But look how mighty and huge it is. A friend of mine, he goes, oh, I broke off a couple branches from I'll show you where it came from the Cambodian shrine. He just broke off a couple, and we stuck them in water until they started to sprout. And I thought, so I can have some jungle with me at home. So sadly I'm a little obsessed. So I started to teach, I used to work at, I taught at another university for about 12 years before I came back here to Fullerton, and I started teaching a history of Disneyland class, which according to Dave Smith was the first, who was the archivist for Disney for years, said it was the first class ever just on the history of the park. And so that was a lot of fun because a lot of my friends had gone on to be Imagineers and gone into other levels of management and whatnot. So let's talk a little bit about this, and we'll talk about the planning of it and why they chose the spot they did. And I have some, I think, hopefully some awesome photographs of all these different parts. And if you have any questions, feel free to let me know. Oh yeah, Isabel, this is where we're going tomorrow. My wife and one of my daughters is in the back. One of my friends works for the Animation Research Library, and their job is to catalog every single piece of hand-drawn animation that Disney has, starting with stuff that Walt drew when he was 14 or 15 years old, all the way up to even the stuff they computer animate today, they still hand draw, and so they scan it. And he showed me, last time I had lunch with him, he showed me scans of stuff from Beauty and the Beast, and the image is so amazing, better than you can see with your own eye. You can tell which, you can see like the roughness of the paper, and you can see which direction the pencil went in. And I guess they used to, if you wanted to draw beauty, they'd go grab some of these and hand them to you, and you might lose them or sell them or not give them back or whatever. And so now they're digitizing them, and you can get them if you work inside a company, and they're just, the stuff he works with is amazing. So it's beautiful. But I think you know the story about how many of you are familiar with the history of Disneyland at all? Sandy, a little bit? Okay, cool. But remember, he wanted to start a park. There's a story about him being there with his daughters, right, in Griffith Park, wishing there was something for parents. That was one of his things. And his other thought was he didn't like the fact that people came to Hollywood and there was nothing to see, nothing exciting to see. And Universal Studios did have a tour, I found it, in the teens and 20s. And they stopped doing it when talkies came out, because you can't have a walking tour through a movie set if you need sound. So that's what really killed it until the late 60s. But Walt wanted a park, something for people to come and see and do. And he thought about a train ride around this is not the Hyperion Studio, their first one, but their second one, where it still is today on Buena Vista, right off the Ventura Freeway. It has a number, 134. I'll take it. But, so first he was thinking about having a studio tour. That there could be a little studio tour people could go by and see, and there would be a train that would go around the edges of it. But then he came up with another idea, because Disney owned this property, actually all of this property, about 17 acres, right across the street. Before the freeway was built, there was just a river for the mighty LA River. Actually, it's my dad almost lost his house when it flooded in the late 40s. Yeah, anyway, so I joke about it, but yeah, it's true. So he looked at this, and the people said you could go by on the weekend and you would see Walt walking through and pacing off spaces, and he actually ran little trails because he was walking through and seeing where he thought the park could go. And he brought a couple people over before Imagineers even existed and said, I want to make a park, and we'll put it in here, and there has to be some room for parking, which was going to be right over there a little bit. But he wanted a place where during the week people could come and visit the studio and go to this park to play. And on the weekend, he wanted it to be reserved only for employees of the studio and their families, which I thought was pretty cool. So they could come there and enjoy it. You could see this is one of there were a couple different maps. This is my favorite, one of the more developed ones. And this is only on 17 acres, so it's packed pretty tightly in there. It's still, this is smaller than, how big is the Arboretum? This is smaller than 26. Wow, okay, so a good deal smaller than the Arboretum. But you can see you still have the river with the steamboat. And there was going to be, I was hoping this was going to be a Jungle Cruise ride to prove that Walt loved it the most. It wasn't. It was like the storybook land kind of a ride. But there was going to be an Old West, where was the Old West? There was going to be an Old West town, and this was like a carnival, but Old West town on the main street, and there was going to be a railroad that went all the way around it. And he pitched it to the city of Burbank. This was during the war. He came up with these ideas, and then after World War II was over, he had a group pitch it to Burbank, and they weren't thrilled about it at all. And by the time the city council came back and denied his request, he'd already moved on to something else. He's like, well, I need more land. And that was how Walt kept kind of doing it. What do they want? Oh yeah, we're done. We don't need that. He's already expanding and building and wanting something bigger and better. But here you can see today, it's the home of ABC TV and the animation building. If you go drive by the freeway, there's the big Wizard's Hat Disney animation building. That was built where Walt, oh sorry, two-finger point. Disney, we're not pointing, we're directing. Very good, been brainwashed. My wife worked for them too, but she worked in entertainment too. Have you worked in entertainment? I worked for entertainment briefly for the opening ceremonies of California, for Disney's California Adventure. I made money, and then I went back to jungle and no money. Anyway, I don't know why I did that. But anyway, so it's where their animation, hand-drawn animation, computer animation, and ABC is done. So, you might know the story about when Walt was looking for people to give money, to come up with money. And it's the one thing I always tell my students, to not think about history from our perspective, but think about it from their perspective, that there was nothing, okay, there's one thing kind of close, but really nothing super close to what Walt had envisioned. And when Walt talked about a theme park, people pictured the Orange County Fair or the LA County Fair, right? Have you been to the Orange County Fair? Mm-hmm. Picture that and all that fun. Or picture, if you go down to 91, what is that called? The Camelot Golf Course? Uh-huh. Right? That's what people thought. Okay, theme park, it's got rides and it's stuck there, and that's what everybody's vision was. And so imagine Walt, everybody had that preconception of what he was trying to build. And he's like, no, it's going to be this. So it was really hard for him. So look, my students were always like, I would give him all my money to be an investor in Disney. Why are these banks so negative about it? And it's because he was doing something really radical and different. And I don't know if you know the story of Herb Ryman, if you remember this, but Roy was back east talking to the bankers, and they decided after Roy was already there, not great planning, that he needed a visual representation of what Disney looked like to show to the bankers. And so he called Herb Ryman and said, who didn't even work for Disney at that point, said, come on over to the studio. And he said, I want you to make the map. And the map's huge. And so Walt told him what he wanted to do, and it has to be done by Monday morning so we can fly it out to my brother. Herb's like, I'm not going to do that. It's going to be 48 hours of constant drawing for a huge map. I'm not going to do it. And Walt said, well, will you do it if I stay with you? He said, okay, right? They can turn Walt down. So they drew this map. This was the first map of Disneyland. You can see the castle that he had designed. They talk about how the Sleeping Beauty one was inspired by the, I can't say the name of it. That's what I was going to say. Neuschwanstein Castle. And you can see, I quite slurred it. And in the original picture, it's exactly what it looked like. But I have one thing interesting for at least for our talk. There's the entrance, there's Main Street, and then Adventureland was going to be over here on this side of the park. So you walk up on Main Street, this was going to be Holidayland, where there's going to be a circus and all kinds of interesting things, but this was Herb Ryman drawing exactly what Walt was telling him. So it's the first time it went from in his brain to like a concrete visual thing. So he describes it, and you can see it's, well, I'll show you, close up, through the magic of the internet. This was going to be the Jungle Cruise ride. That's an awfully big boat. But you'd start out there and cruise around this one island, and then you'd go back, and there would be people and animals, and Walt, for a long time, wanted real live animals. Thought it was going to be called True Life Adventureland, after the True Life adventure movies, so we thought, since that's the theme, we might as well have real animals. Wouldn't that be exciting? So it would actually back right up to Tomorrowland. And in later versions of it, I'll show you a later one. This is a later aerial view of the park. This was still before they knew where they were going to build it. They had no clue. They just knew they needed lots of space. So here's Main Street. That was still Holidayland, and this was still going to be the Jungle Cruise, or the Rivers of Romance. It had different names. Still just basically one giant island that you drive around. Right here was going to be a nursery where you could buy plants that you saw out in the jungle. They were going to have all the different plants and things for sale that you could get. And there was going to be a greenhouse, and they were going to build a 200-seat theater where you could watch the True Life Adventure films when you were there. And that was the plan when they started building. This was one of the more accurate maps they had when they started. So if you've been to Disney, I'm assuming you've been to Disneyland, right? Right? This is kind of what they were thinking it was going to look like. But they changed their ideas pretty quickly once they saw the land that it was going to be built on. They had to make several different changes to it. Let's talk about one of its influences, and then I'll talk about how they found the land. Has anyone ever been here at Tivoli Gardens in Copenhagen? Great. Just, we can tell anything we want. Just the two of us. You've been there too? Yeah, awesome. What did you think of it?
Oh, it's gorgeous.
Yeah?
Beautiful lights at night.
Mm-hmm. Oh, I didn't go there at night.
You missed out.
All right, I did.
It's lovely.
Yeah. I went on this was way back in 1989. I was on a 3-month-long archaeological trip with my college, and we spent it in Israel doing archaeological work, and so I was all tan, as muscular as I was going to get. And we had the chance to stay in Copenhagen for a week. So we'd spent all summer in Israel. We were getting ready to go home, 3 months away from home. And my friend's like, why do you want to stay here? And we had maybe $100 between us to laugh. We were at the end of our money, as good college students were. and I made all my friends go to Tivoli Gardens. Like, why? Because Walt Disney came here all the time, and this was what it was supposed to look like. And it's still like other theme parks where there's multiple entrances to get in, but this is the main gate to get in. But what made Tivoli interesting to Walt was there were gardens everywhere. It wasn't just like the Orange County Fair. I make fun of the fair a lot because I live right across the street from it, so you don't pay for parking, you're parking in my neighborhood. That's just fine. That's how I get car stereos. It's all good. But there's beautiful gardens and there's music playing, and it's right in the middle of Copenhagen, but it's a beautiful little kind of hidden gem. And he went there at least 3 or 4 times and marked off spaces, and he liked the whole garden aspect of it. So it's the only other park that has that element to it. Knott's Berry Farm didn't have it, Coney Island didn't have it, where he really wanted to have a beautiful garden park. So if you ever go to Copenhagen, see the Little Mermaid, and then go. Right? The girl I was dating at the time, she wanted to see the Little Mermaid, you know, in the harbor. So we walk all the way over there, and she's like, "It's so small," because it's a Little Mermaid. It's not. She didn't find it amusing either. So you guys just, it's fine. It's fine. Anyway, so moving on. Let's talk about some other places where they decided to find it. So Walt didn't know where he was going to build it. They thought about Burbank and abandoned that. They thought about building it up in near Valencia. And they actually also bought about 40 acres in Thousand Oaks under some other names, just to kind of buy the land just in case to see how it was. But they had the chance to buy some land up in Valencia, and they thought, we don't know where we should build it because, you guys, some people already know this. This is awesome. It's fun not just talking to 18-year-olds. Not that 18-year-olds aren't awesome. You are, but you guys can remember stuff like stuff that happened 10 years ago. It's good. There was a president before Obama? Yeah, there was a lot of them. Ton. Sorry, it's true. Sorry. Stop laughing, it'll encourage me in a very bad way. But that's where the population growth was going. So it was all in LA, and then it expanded into the valley. Like my parents are from the valley, all my siblings were born in the San Fernando Valley, and that's where the population had been growing. So Walt hired this company, Stanford Research Institute, and gave them the task of finding a place to build a park. And he told them he needed about 180 acres, and he was very open on where he wanted it. But this is basically the range that he gave them. He didn't want to go to Santa Barbara or into San Diego itself, but this whole range, even far into Riverside and San Bernardino. Find a good spot, and one of his only rules was he didn't want anything by the ocean, nothing right at the ocean, because he had a chance to get some stuff in the Palos Verdes Peninsula and turned it down, because you can't compete with the ocean.
Well, he didn't want to compete with you.
Yeah, how many of you remember Pacific Ocean Park?
Yes.
Right? It's kind of like the Santa Monica Pier, but better. And it opened a year after. One of the reasons when Walt went to CBS and asked to see if CBS wanted to start the Disney show, one of the reasons that CBS shot him down was that they were already getting ready to build a theme park with the guys from Hollywood Park Racetrack. You've never Santa Anita, I think it was Hollywood Park Racetrack. And so they built Pacific Ocean Park the year after Disney opened. And in the summer of 56 and 57, there were weeks where it beat Disneyland in attendance, because it was right in Santa Monica, right where all the people were. But all the things that Walt had warned against all began to happen to Pacific Ocean Park, and now there's literally just a piling or two. But they looked for different places where they could find the land, where they could buy the land, and there was a man who wrote a really interesting book named Buzz Price, and he, Jason Buzz? Harris? Buzz Price? Okay. Wrote a great book about it, because he was the one that did all the figures, and he did analysis, and they figured out that the population center of LA was moving to the south. It was kind of done moving into the valley, kind of filled it out. It was going to move to the south, and they estimated by the mid-60s the center of population was going to be in the southern part of the city of Fullerton. Yay! That was going to be the center of the population, so move it somewhere down there. And they said that the San Fernando Valley gets too hot, San Gabriel Valley is too hot. It's not actually all too hot. And this is too close to the ocean, and south of Santa Ana was too far away, Ventura was too far away. So they came up with a spot. I have it on there. I made a brand new PowerPoint for you, and I forget what I put on there. Oh, look at that. It's a map from 1920. Back before there were freeways. Because there's Los Angeles, and there's Garden Grove. Woo! Well, look at Fullerton. Look how huge it is. Woo! Had to have been hundreds of people living there. And then, like Santa Ana, up against the mountains, and then that's where my wife's from. There's nobody. All right. So you see, wasn't that by the 50s? It wasn't that unpopulated, but it was still pretty in the middle of nowhere. But I just thought that was a very cool map. But this was the projected plan of where they were going to build. The freeways. You can see some, like, well, it was the 18, became the 91. Some of these became freeways. I always wondered why the 55 goes up, and then there's a Newport Boulevard in Tustin and a Newport Boulevard in Costa Mesa, but they're not the same. It's because the 55 freeway was it, and they just made it into a freeway. I'm like, why aren't those connected? They used to be. So anyway, they were going to build freeways, and they figured out where the freeways were going to be built, and SRI figured out that eventually it was going to look like this. And that the 5 freeway was going to come right down, right near the center. This is where the center of the population was going to be. The 5 freeway was going to go right along it. And Price called it the amoeba, or they called it the blob. They had different names for it. But it was a place less than a mile on either side of the freeway, of the 5 freeway, from La Mirada all the way to Santa Ana, and said, this is where you're going to build your park. Somewhere along there, a mile on either side. And the trick is trying to find the land for it. But here's the city of Anaheim, 2 maps of the city of Anaheim, and the reason why I wanted to show this to you, close up and I have a bigger one, is originally, if you drive around downtown Anaheim, like where the packing house is, the packing district is, where all the hip kids hang out and I go to get food, you'll notice there's a north street and a south street and the east and west, because Anaheim was settled by Germans and they were very fine set up, and you'll notice that there's, is that racist? I don't know, but West Street actually borders right where Disneyland was going to be, and the land actually wasn't part of Anaheim. Part of the land was Anaheim, part of it was county land. And Walt said he doesn't want to buy it unless it's one city. He doesn't want to be dealing with 2 different governments. He wants to deal with one. And so there were a couple different spots he wanted to buy it. Originally there was a place on Ball Road on the other side, and that's where Disneyland was going to go. They had found, they had like shell corporations to buy the land, and they had worked with Coldwell Banker in LA, and they approached these people, and there was a Viking Van Lines had property there, and so they had to buy them out as well to get all the buildings and everything. And Viking didn't want to give it up because it was right off of where the new freeway was going to go, so it was going to be great for them. And then word leaked out that somebody from LA, Hollywood, wanted to build it, and this might be Disney's park, and prices went up, and Walt said, "Go forget it." And then they had a spot on La Palma Avenue, so farther up, but still in Anaheim. So kind of by Euclid in La Palma, still on that side of the freeway. Is that where you live?
That's where I live, yeah.
Oh, you do? Oh, we live in the middle of Adventureland right now. They had the land, and they were excited about it. One of the rules that Walt said is he wanted only one owner. So a big chunk of land, only one owner, because what if there's 50 people and 49 say okay and one says no, right, you're in trouble. So they go to celebrate that they think they found this spot on La Palma, and they drive over to Knott's, and they have dinner at Mrs. Knott's Chicken Restaurant. And while they're there talking about the place, sitting right behind Walt Disney was a realtor. And he heard what Walt was talking about and the land, and went out and bought 20 acres of the land before Walt could move on it. And when they heard that, the price of the land went up, and Walt said, forget it, forget it, forget it, maybe we won't build it at all, or we'll build it somewhere else, because I'm sick of people fighting it. Well, don't talk loud at dinner. So, right? Well, Anaheim really wanted it to be built there from what the words they'd heard, and they found a spot. It was where Disneyland actually came. The only thing it was 17 different owners, but they had already all agreed to work together to sell the land together probably to a home developer. So they were already kind of working as one unit, so they could get a price 1 unit for right around $4,000 an acre. That's about Orange County land you can get, right? What? Back then, yeah, back then. Sure, it's $4,000 a square foot. Anyway, I chose to be an educator, and I married a woman who teaches theater, so we're poor forever. Anyway, but they found this group that was willing to sell all of the land, and so they bought as much as he could afford. And you might know that Walt cashed out his life insurance and put a mortgage on his house, and he gave up. So people think, well, he knew he was going to make money. He gave up everything he had because he figured it was going to work, but he was going to be in a huge amount of trouble. And remember, Disney had almost gone bankrupt in the 40s, and the late 40s, early 50s weren't a great time. So his company wasn't super strong and powerful like it is today. So him building a theme park, not a brilliant idea according to most people. So that's why they decided to build it, and they built it. And I just showed you this, because it shows you Anaheim today. I don't know why it went that direction. But it shows you where the west part is, and here's where Disneyland is. They kind of expanded that way. Because originally when Disney announced they were going to build here, Garden Grove, Santa Ana, which is over here, and Orange all sued, claiming that was their land. Because it was county land. And so they all said, oh, that's our land, we want that! And Walt's like, if it's theirs, we'll back out of the deal. Not going to happen, because I want to deal with one landowner. And so Anaheim was able to annex it, which is why they go beyond West Street, making their Germans mad. So here's a picture of Anaheim in September of 1955. There's Catella and Brookhurst, so Disneyland is over this way. There's in Euclid. You see, mostly just it's a shopping center, but it's dirt. But there were mostly home divisions, still a lot of open land. It looks like I moved to Irvine in the late 70s. That's kind of like what Irvine looked like. I moved from the big city of Orange to Irvine. But here's the land that they built Disneyland on, and I'll tell you some of the stories about the Jungle Cruise and whatnot. But here's the property. It was going to become Disneyland. These were some of the buildings they actually saved and took. This is Mighty Harbor Boulevard, both lanes of it. And you can see it looks like it's done, but it's not. They've been clearing away space for the freeway, but they're still working on it. You can see this is acres of orange trees and walnut trees. And here's another close-up of it. You can see it's pretty, almost looks like a little forest. They're pretty densely populated, lots of trees and lots of land. But Walt liked it because it was nice and flat. He didn't want big hills because he wanted to put them where he wanted to put them. And you still couldn't see a lot of buildings, and you couldn't really see Saddleback and whatnot around that from there. And this is looking off north kind of towards us. There's Disneyland under construction, and you can see the freeway still being built. But then just to give you kind of an example, this is Cal State Fullerton in 1960. Here's the freeway that doesn't exist. That's right here, and we're over here somewhere. It was still just wide open. I showed that to a professor. One of my mentor professors was the first. Did anyone go to school here? Anyone go to Cal State Fullerton? My mentor professor was the very first history professor hired here when it opened in 1957. And he was in the 90s. He was my mentor. So I don't know about this from the high school that this school used to be in. But so still not a lot of stuff around. You can see it in Brea and Pomona and whatnot. So here's the property. One of the interesting things that happened is, remember Adventureland was going to be on this side? They decided after they took pictures of the property, and they thought, okay, where are we going to put stuff? And Manu will talk about in a minute, Bill Evans, they took a transparency of the plan for Disneyland, and they set it over an aerial photograph of the land. And he said, okay, here's some trees I want saved, I want these trees saved, and this tree saved. And he noticed there was a row of eucalyptus trees. Actually, I think a couple different rows of eucalyptus trees, which they use as windbreaks. So when the Santa Ana winds come through, it doesn't destroy all the plants and whatnot. So he said, let's move Adventureland over here, and I can use all those trees. Why move them? We'll leave them there, we'll block off Main Street, and it'll just be great. And so Disney went, okay, flip it. And so they just moved Jungle Cruise over. Worked out great because it gave them almost twice the amount of land that it was going to have in the first place. But you can kind of see where the railroad was planned to go by the trees they left in. And a lot of these other trees were just left there until they decided what they were going to do with them. So there's Harbor, there's Catella. There's a famous story about construction. You guys know the story about the colorblind? Yes. There's a great new book that just came out, and he's written by a friend of mine, so I'm not getting any money out of it, but it's by Todd James Pierce. It's called 3 Years in Wonderland. I've never heard of it. Literally came out 2 weeks ago by the University of Mississippi Press, but you can get it on Amazon. 3 Years in Wonderland. It's about how for my money, it's the best book on the first couple years of Disneyland ever. The detail he went to was amazing, absolutely amazing. I could tell he didn't work at the park because he got one thing wrong about Jungle Cruise. It bothered me, so he got an email. But he's a professor of literature at Cal Poly, San Luis Obispo. But it's an amazing, amazing book done with decades of research on the topic. Absolutely, I'll let you look at it afterwards. But he debunks the story about the colorblind tree removal. The story was that they put tags on the trees. You know, it was red to keep them, or blue if you're going to get rid of them. And he was colorblind, so he just knocked them all over. And he was able to find out that that's not actually accurate. That's not actually what happened. The land had already been moved, and they were already grading things, and they had already moving trees. And what happened is there was a guy who may have been colorblind who knocked down, they estimate, 5 or 6 trees in Adventureland that were supposed to be saved. But the main landscape architect, a guy named Bill Evans, didn't notice for a week that those trees were gone. So it wasn't this devastating thing that everybody thought. And it was one of the guys that helped build it, the park, a guy named C.V. Wood, was one of the people that Walt hired to build it. One of his friends kind of exaggerated the story because it made good press, and the publicity department did a whole write-up on it. So Disney kind of took a kernel of truth and expanded it and made it seem like it was a much wilder story than it really was. It was just a handful of trees. But you can see there was still plenty there. Even in the early construction, they started on Jungle Cruise first. My theory is because it's the best part. But I guess we may have other opinions. But they knew it needed time to grow. They needed to put the plants in, let them grow and get established, and they're going to need time. And the spring of 1955 was one of the wettest on record. So they got a lot of, I don't know if it was El Nino or what, but they got a lot of rain that year. So it hurt construction, but helped the plants a good bit. So there's another view. You can kind of see it. We're getting closer. There's still the jungle and some other random plants. There it is right after opening day. So you remember Holidayland was companies could rent it out for parties, and you'd have barbecues in the tent, and there's baseball fields and playgrounds, and you can see how small it was, but how there was this huge area of greenery as the Jungle Cruise. And one thing I like, I think I might have another picture of it, was this big mound of dirt. When they built Sleeping Beauty's castle, they just dumped the dirt off to the side, planted trees on it, and named it Holiday Hill. So I should tell you about my current project as it relates to this. I'm working on 2 different books on the Jungle Cruise, because that's how limited my imagination is. But one of them is called Skipper Stories, and it's a series of interviews with every single skipper I can get my hands on. And this is nothing more than just all the interviews that I've already typed up. I'll keep it with me so I can review them. But it's the first oral history of any Disney attraction. So I've talked to people from the 50s. Next week I'm interviewing a former student of mine who is the current Rookie of the Year at Jungle Cruise. And yesterday I interviewed a guy for about 3.5 hours who worked there in the mid-70s to the early 80s and got to go to Japan to work on the Jungle Cruise at Tokyo, Japan, and heard all kinds of wild... It's fun when you hear these rumors, like, there's no way that really happened. And they say, oh yeah, I believe it happened. I'm like, okay, there's one. All right, got to find somebody else who could back it up. Like, yeah, that's why he got fired. Okay, good. Good to know. Good to know. You can see it was pretty well built, but I asked... one of the guys I interviewed worked at different places around the park besides the jungle, and I asked him about Holiday Hill and what was there. He's like, it was just a place. He goes, we had to go through there with flashlights at night and keep couples from making out. That was really all we did. That was like all that was there. I'm like, all right, good to know. That's in the book. You can see a few little tiny hotels were first built. That's all that was there. And there it is. Also, right. This is 56. You can see the Jungle Cruise. You can still see everything. You can still see the whole thing. You can still see right into it. So that's right. I like it because it's a rare color photo. There's Holiday Hill. Woo! Just a packed mound of dirt. There you are. That's exciting. You can see this is still Disney property, and they just left a bunch of the orange groves there. They didn't have any plans for them. They just left them there. So you can see it's still very, very rudimentary. One of the brilliant things, because Walt wanted it to make it like an experience where you're in a different world, and so Bill Evans came up with the idea of making this berm. So he thought he wanted all these trees, and he said, well, we don't have the time or money to do that. Let's just make a big mound of dirt, and then I'll plant trees all over it, and that will block out the outside world. Because he wanted to make sure you couldn't see anything outside of Disneyland. So when you were in there, you were in kind of your own unique experience. So, and it worked. And here's a real map from Disneyland in 1955. As you can see how it looks very tiny, doesn't it? It actually looks more full than, oh, this is 59, because the matter one's there. Yeah. All right. So they're earlier maps. Yeah, my PowerPoint's wrong. That just ruins everything. And then, this was fun, 55 and 80, and then today, look, there's a whole other at Jungle Cruise, we used to say, go out fun in your day, just be careful. There's a spot out in our own parking lot that's haunted. You don't want to go anywhere near it. And then we were told to stop making fun of California Adventures. It was great. We would go, there was nobody at the park. It was awesome. It was like, California Adventure is sweet. So we told people, don't go. More rides for us, right? But you can see, and now the new Star Wars Land is going to go back here. I like this because you can see the jungle is slowly swallowing up everything where you can't really see. This was from the opening summer of Disneyland. And I love this picture because it shows, look how barren it still looks right in front of the castle. And the budget for the horticulture, the budget for Disneyland was supposed to be $3 million, and then when they started, it would be $5 to $7 million. That was a number they threw around for a while, maybe $7 million. By the time they were done, it was about $17 million. The budget for the landscaping was $386,000. And so I did math. Well, I didn't do math. I went to a website. And adjusted for inflation, it equals out to $4.5 million for landscaping, which is not. That's a good chunk of change. If you just said $386,000 is a good bit of money, and they ran through that really quickly. I like that there's just a regular regulation fire hydrant. Just